Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hello and welcome to An Unconventional Life podcast. This is Dr. Russell Strickland. I'm the founder and CEO of Dissertation Done and your host here today. And today I am so excited about this. We have Dr. Hoby Wedler. And Dr. Wedler earned his doctoral degree in organic chemistry. And that might sound tough to some of you guys, but I tell you what, Dr. Wedler was born blind and has been blind all of his life and earned his doctoral degree in organic chemistry. So for those of you making excuses, this one's for you. This episode's for you. Now, Dr. Wedler has gone on to found companies like Accessible Science, which was a nonprofit organization. He held annual chemistry camps for blind and visually impaired students. He also has hosted Truly Wine tastings with the Francis Ford Coppola wineries, and I love me some Francis Ford Coppola Merlot. He's founded a company called Senspoint, which is a creative brand strategy consultancy, and he's been recognized by organizations like Forbes and by President Barack Obama as a champion for change. So listen up here. This is going to be a great episode. I can't wait to introduce you to Dr. Hoby Wedler. Before I do, real quickly, as always, this episode is brought to you by Dissertation Done. If you are a doctoral student who is about to start working on your dissertation, currently in the midst of it, maybe struggling a little bit, reach out to us so that we can see if you might be a good fit for our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program. We tend to get our students through the dissertation process a good year or two faster than they would on their own. And you can find out more about that at dissertationdone.com/done. And if you're already living your unconventional life and you have a message that you'd like to share with the world, the best way to do that is by expanding your authority by writing your own book. And our Expand Your Authority program helps you do that, just that. In a few months, we'll go from developing an idea to having a book actually out there available for sale in paperback form, in electronic form on Amazon, and any other platform you might like. So if you'd like to get your message out there, the Expand Your Authority program, you can find out more about it at dissertationdone.com/book. Now, speaking of books, Hoby, I think you've got 3 or 4 or 5 in you. With the discussions we've had so far, it's amazing what you've accomplished so far. Welcome, Hoby, and thank you.
First of all, Dr. Strickland, I just want to say thank you so much for this invitation. It's a real honor to be joining you on this podcast, and I feel like it's a good fit. I feel like my life is definitely unconventional, so it's a good opportunity to get to chat with you and connect. So it's been a real pleasure getting to know you beforehand, and again, it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you for being here, Hoby, and I'll let our listeners judge who has the honor here today, because I am fascinated with what you've been doing. Tell me a little bit about your story. Let's go back to why did you decide to get a doctoral degree? A lot of, not many people do that.
Yeah.
A lot of our audience does, but not many people in general do. So what made you decide to pursue that?
Well, that's a great question. And, my first of all, I want to go back just one step further and say that my love for science really began as a young child, with my parents being very motivational, very much telling me that I should do whatever I wanted to do, and being very practical about it as well. But I've always loved understanding how things worked. So Absolutely. I remember being, I think, 5 or 6 years old in my house and turning on the tap at the sink and saying, wait a minute, how is this water coming under pressure from wherever to me? And that sparked me learning about the municipal water system and the fact that there's this whole network and maze of water pipes underground that are carrying water from one point to the other. I was like, man, this is I just love understanding how things fit together. And of course, when you're like that, you also take things apart and maybe or maybe not put them back together again the right way, right? So that was me as a kid. And oftentimes it's said that a great high school teacher really paves a career and paves a path forward, that they really are great mentors for us. And I had a really excellent high school chemistry teacher, Lee Boys, who really set the stage for me to fall in love with chemistry as a subject, and something, something really exciting, was the ability to know that, with the right assistance and with the right attitude, I could go and receive my undergraduate degree in chemistry, which I did from the University of California, Davis. Now, when I was an undergrad and really all along, I've always known that I've had the heart of a teacher. That's just my goal in life, is to get people excited about something maybe they didn't know they were excited about or could be excited about, just to make people feel good about what they're doing and about themselves, sort of a motivational teacher sort of thing. And my dream job is going to sound surprising to people, but my dream job was to be a college lecturer of chemistry, where my whole goal was to walk into a class, a big lecture hall of 500 people at, 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, full of freshman chemistry students, teach them some chemistry and have them go from feeling like, oh God, I absolutely dread having to sit in this chemistry class for an hour, to, hey, chemistry and science is very interesting and I really want to study it and understand it. So that was the driver to get the PhD. It was a real desire to teach at the college level and perhaps to do research at the college level, but I was actually driven much more by the teaching component of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that you're right. When you talk about mentors, I had two folks that I can point to in high school. My chemistry teacher, his name was Louis Gottlieb, and he was just as smart as a tack. I mean, he was really on top of things, and helped instill that notion of excellence and of striving to learn more. We actually had, under his guidance, organic chemistry in high school, which is a little bit insane. And I won't say it was even near the level that you have obviously studied, but we were talking about all of these different types of molecules you can put together with carbon and hydrogen. Yeah. And then my math teacher was awesome. We had this experience where I was in geometry class as a freshman, and it was after lunch. They kept the room really hot, it seemed like, I recall. And I had a very hard time not falling asleep, in part because I was a freshman. We had high school seniors in the same class. Obviously, they're not going to be moving at the same pace. And so we had a few experiences in that class of I may or may not have nodded off occasionally and gotten in a little bit of trouble for that. And also,
you're not alone there. Let me just say that.
So a few of us ultimately went up to this teacher as freshmen, and I certainly would say not very confident at the time, and asked her, hey, is it possible that next year we have a class that's just for sophomores? Somehow she thought that was just the most entitled, elitist, insensitive thing in the world to ask for. And she was so incensed that she actually brought it up at the faculty meeting. Can you believe these kids? And my math teacher for the next 3 years said, you know what, that sounds like a good idea. And she called us her guinea pigs. She had our class of sophomores, then juniors, and then seniors. We were the only grade level in that math class each year. And she took us through for the next 3 years. And I honestly don't know that I would have felt the same. I always felt like I was drawn to math and science, but I don't know that I would have felt the same way if I didn't have her. And hers was not.
That's so amazing.
My experience, it wasn't this ultra expertise. She wasn't the genius, scientist type person, but she cared about us, and she instilled that, wanting to learn and knowing someone was going to be there to support you. And that was really important in my growth.
Oh, that's incredible. And I really, just thinking about mentors, and we'll get to talk about our graduate mentors here in a minute, but I really think, mentoring is something that has so much value. And I would encourage all of your listeners to think about in their lives who their mentors have been.
Absolutely.
And, reach out to those people, thank them now, thank them a year from now, thank them 20 years from now, because they're the ones that supported you and got you to where you are. And I, simply put, I think that a mentor really sees a future for us, maybe before we see that future for ourselves, and they kind of guide us to that future.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, that sometimes a mentor can see just a little bit further than you can because they've been there a little bit longer. They've seen what other people have done. and they can say, I know that you can do this when you might not even know what this is. So that's an important point.
Exactly.
And before we move on, you had mentioned teaching and how that was something that you were very inspired by. I just wanted to mention, get it on the record here, but to see if you've actually heard them. Have you ever listened to the Feynman lectures in physics? Richard Feynman.
I love Professor Feynman for his amazing storytelling quality, and just the way that he pulls you into his conversation. No, it's absolutely amazing.
So if you like science at all, if you are at all into physics, these lectures were fairly basic. They were kind of freshman, sophomore level courses, but look up, I'm sure they must be on YouTube. I'm sure you must be able to find them easily. The Feynman lectures on physics. He just had this remarkable way of explaining things, and I've endeavored to try to develop that quality to some extent myself. I won't compare myself to him. He was a Nobel laureate. He's the guy who actually explained to Congress what happened with the Challenger explosion, that disaster. People couldn't figure out why these O-rings didn't work, and he simply kind of put an O-ring in a glass of ice water and demonstrated what had happened to it right there live in front of the committee, and just made it so clear to everybody, oh, this is what the problem was. And so not just the engineers,
so amazing
but everybody, the legislatures, everybody watching on C-SPAN or whatever it was at the time could understand what happened.
You can actually find that video on YouTube as well, and it's worth watching, because sometimes what some might consider an oversimplification is exactly what's necessary. And I got to be honest with you, that's one thing that I take very seriously when I'm talking with people about science or writing about science, is popularizing it. I don't like it when people just deliver a bunch of jargon that doesn't make sense. I think one of the most highly finessed, highly trained skills is the ability to what we call popularize one's work. And that can be science, that can be math, that can be history. When we get into things and get our PhDs in them, or our doctorates of any kind in them, we inherently know a lot about them. And when we present on them to people that we talk to, it might sound like we're using too much jargon and like we're too sophisticated. So if you have your PhD, if you're working on your PhD, I challenge all of you to really think about how to popularize that work as much as you can.
So that brings up three quick stories for me. The first one is that when I was an undergrad in physics, we had something that might now be considered a little bit pejorative, but we had something we called the grandmother theorem. And that was that you don't understand something until you don't truly understand something until you can explain it to your grandmother. Now, the idea here is that most people's grandmothers aren't theoretical physicists. It's not that they're simpletons. It's just that they're not theoretical physicists. And so if you can explain it to your grandmother, she will listen to you because she's your grandmother, right? But you've got to, in addition to her, giving you her attention, you've got to give her an understanding that meet her where she is. And so that's really important. I had an undergraduate professor who told this story about how he got on one occasion, he was speaking with his grandchildren for a while, and they went running back into the kitchen. And a few minutes later, his wife came out. She said, "What did you do to these kids?" And he said, "They asked me why the sky was blue." And she said, "Okay, well, what did you do?" He said, "I told them." And so that's kind of the opposite of popularizing science. But then a professor that I was a teaching assistant for, one day he was teaching a lecture class for the science class that freshmen who weren't going to take science anymore were going to take.
Yes.
And he stopped in the middle of that class at one point and said, "You know what? Everything I've told you to this point is a lie. And everything I'm going to tell you from here on out is a lie. But it's going to be enough of the truth that you're going to get something out of it." And he says, because the fact of the matter is, if I explain this as best as I possibly know how to, that's still a lie because we don't have all the answers yet. So what we do is we give you enough of the truth to help you understand and move you forward. And then if you take another course, we're going to say, well, here's where we weren't quite right about what we talked about before. Here's the next level of understanding and the next level. And this notion of meeting people where they are and giving them what they need to hear, not to placate them, but to help them understand, is really, really important. Neil deGrasse Tyson is an excellent example of a person who will do this. He'll explain things so that anybody who kind of graduated from college or maybe even high school can understand what he's talking about, but he doesn't get into like the math and the hardcore difficult parts of the process. He explains it so that people can understand and get something out of his explanation.
The other thing, Russell, that I think is cool, a more modern analogy of that is I really commend the work that SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's space travel company, is doing. I mean, when you watch their webcasts, their live webcasts of tests on their equipment, or better yet, launches and recovery of pieces of the vehicle, they explain to you exactly what's going on, the whole process through, and it's like anyone can watch it and gain an appreciation for it. And it's like, I call what they're doing rocket science made easy, and I think it's so smart.
Well, and they're one of the pioneers of setting up a primary stage rocket, sending it up into space, and then bringing it back. Yeah. And I always thought, gosh, what's the point of doing that exactly? And then he said, well, here's how much it costs to build a primary stage rocket. And he said, and I don't remember what the number is, so I don't want to say. It was many millions of dollars. Many millions of dollars. Yeah. And he said, so let's just imagine that we lift a huge pallet full of cash into space. Yeah. And then we drop it. Would you like to go catch it?
Exactly.
And the answer is yes. No, go catch that cash as it comes falling down to the earth. And so that's what they decided to do, is instead of letting it burn up, fall into the ocean, whatever, they brought it back under control for a relatively cheap price to bring it back down and recover it. And then they basically caught this pallet full of cash. And I thought that was an awesome explanation for folks as to why do we do this in the first place?
Well, it's like, and he wants to commercialize space travel. So it's, if you think about it like the airline industry, okay, if you're United Airlines, do you really want to throw away each 737 after you fly it? No.
Right.
No.
Now, I don't think we're talking about quite the same numbers in terms of cost, but it's in the ballpark. It certainly is in the ballpark. The hardest thing to do is to get something into orbit. You could send something to the next star, and time and navigation notwithstanding, the expensive part of that is like getting it out past the moon. After that, the further away you get it, that's just cheaper per unit distance as you go away.
It's just a little shove every few months,
Yeah. So, but let's talk about, Hoby, so you mentioned your motivation for going into this process, but now organic chemistry is not the easiest thing in the world. Getting a PhD in anything is not the easiest thing in the world. And you have never been able to see any kind of image. You said that you can't even detect light is the level of blindness you have. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
How the heck do you get an organic chemistry PhD if you can't see all the little drawings of all these complicated molecules? So tell us about that.
To be honest with you, I didn't know how that would be possible either. When I was finishing up my undergraduate career, I found my love for organic chemistry as an undergraduate student, because what I realized is that I had a sort of an aha moment. It was a Friday afternoon during winter quarter of my sophomore year, and I was in my first semester organic chemistry class. And I had a great assistant. Let me just say that. She is an amazing person who I was fortunate enough to work with from my undergraduate career all the way through my graduate career. And she would actually explain things verbally, and if that wasn't enough, she would draw things out using a technique that created easy to draw and easy to feel tactile drawings that were basically disposable but could be saved for a long time, because they were basically done by pressing hard on a sheet of thick paper. I'll save that story. But it's an interesting, so I was able to feel some of the drawings, but I really learned how to think about chemistry using ball and stick model kits and good verbal descriptions. So I became really strong at naming and nomenclature of molecules. And really, molecules are just a collection of atoms that are connected by bonds, single, double, or triple bonds. And what I realized, again, it was an aha moment. It was Friday afternoon. I'd been working all day. It's about 5:30 p.m. And I said, I know why this makes sense. It's because I have been using the same skills that I use right now as an organic chemist for all of my life for my survival as a blind traveler. So I can't see anything. I can't see down the city street that I live on, right? So I need to imagine everything. If I'm lecturing to a group of students, I need to imagine where they are in that classroom. I can't see them out there. So everything is in my mind, right? And if I can imagine meters and kilometers and feet and miles and all that stuff and figure out how to navigate from one point to the other in the town that I live in, there's absolutely no reason I shouldn't be able to reduce those distance to angstroms and nanometers and use the same exact process to think about atoms and molecules and how atoms connect to form molecules, much like how blocks of a city connect with streets to form a city or a college campus, right? So that I loved organic chemistry, and I was good at doing it in my mind. I still like to think that I am, but the hard part is really, and was and still is, getting material from the very visual medium that you describe into my mind, and then B, getting my results back out into that visual medium. That really requires assistance. So to answer your question, I didn't know how I was going to get a PhD in organic chemistry either. I was in my final advanced organic synthesis class. Actually, I don't know if I told you this before, but I also got a degree in United States history because I didn't know that I would be able to study chemistry. And I honestly thought that I was going to be teaching history instead. My goal was to teach chemistry, but I was ready to apply to graduate programs in history. So I knew at that point I was a nerd, right? So I knew that I wanted to get a PhD in something. And I didn't know if chemistry was going to be the right field. But when, again, talking about mentors, when my advanced organic synthesis professor connected me with an computational organic chemist by the name of Dean Tantillo, Dean convinced me to work in his group for a summer and just as an undergraduate researcher and see how it went. And man, I worked in his group, and through the support of him and all of my group members, we were able to make a lot of the exercises that we carry out and research processes that we carry out in that lab fully accessible to me with some in-house scripting and that sort of thing. Now, getting a PhD as anybody is a time-consuming and arduous process. As a blind person, it's even more so. So it was not uncommon for me to work both for my undergraduate and graduate tenure, 110, 115-hour weeks. That was very typical because it takes, the only thing that blindness does is it adds a little bit of a lack of efficiency when you're doing things in a sighted world and you're dealing with something where data is inherently presented in a visual way, as in organic chemistry, just going to take more time. And I was a stickler for not wanting any more assistance than absolutely necessary. So I like to make a lot of the work that I did, accessible to me.
Right. No, that's awesome. And that attitude, I think, carries you very far in life, regardless as to what discipline you're following. I had a friend that I grew up with who was born with very, very small lower leg on his right leg. Essentially, he had a stump below the knee, and he was constantly being fitted for prosthetics as he grew up. But he was a very big, strong, kind of burly, barrel-chested guy because he was constantly rolling himself around in wheelchairs and on crutches between prosthetics. He developed such a wonderful attitude for dealing with life, and when he was on his prosthetic, he could outrun half the class. I mean, you don't have you don't have to let these things define you or slow you down. Particularly, even though it's more difficult, everybody has their kind of issues that they have to deal with, and they range broadly. And the fact that yours is kind of obvious to people when they meet you is no different than people's issues that are hidden from them. The fact of the matter is, it's about deciding to take that head on and not allow that to define who you are or keep you from doing anything you want to do. So I just really commend you because that is a big hurdle to overcome, and you've done it with aplomb. So that's really, really cool. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Russell. And what I would just encourage everybody to do who's thinking about maybe getting a PhD and kind of on the fence about it, I want to say it's definitely a challenge, and it's really exciting to take on a challenge and succeed, but it is also a great deal of work. So really think about, is this right for me? It feels amazing and this is sort of what I've always loved doing, is challenging myself and not really knowing how I would overcome the challenge or succeed in the challenge, but you just have to start somewhere and just tick away at it. It's like climbing a cliff. It's just one step at a time, and you will eventually make it to the top. So, and I just wanted to just say a couple of more things about the accessibility stuff that I sort of touched on throughout my graduate tenure. It was always my attitude that I didn't want any more assistance than absolutely necessary. So the way that my graduate career worked was that I would talk to my advisor about a project that was interesting to me, or he would come to me with a project that he needed done. And it would take me a little longer maybe than some of my peers to arrive at the results and at the data that we need to get to, because I'd first figure out, okay, what do I need to do to make this project, more accessible to me? And what do I need to make me able to do this work myself? And then I would do the actual work. So I would say that about 35 to 40% of my dissertation ultimately was, best practices for making chemistry accessible. And a lot of that had to do with 3D printing and writing in-house computer scripts to extract key information from very, very large files. Why not publish that stuff? Why not tell the world what we did? I don't want anyone to have to recreate the wheel. And then I would say about 65 to 70% of my dissertation was actual hardcore chemistry research. So it was sort of a blend. And I talked with my advisor a lot about this, and ultimately decided that, who am I kidding? Why would I ever think about holding these accessibility findings back? Like, that's just, to me, that's almost just as interesting as the science, because I want other people who maybe have sight loss or whatever to be able to do whatever it is they want to do with minimal assistance, and be able to read our papers and glean from it some information about that. And I'll just tell you one quick story related to this that I think is particularly interesting, because it shows how you really can take something that might be seen as a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage. So we had a mechanism that we were working on. It was actually a migration of a bromine. It was what we call a 1,3 halide shift. So a shift of a bromine from one carbon to another carbon, two units over in a molecule. And we'd figured out the majority of the mechanism. We just couldn't figure out how this bromine moved from where it was on one carbon to go onto the carbon where we actually needed it. Mm-hmm. And I said, we were kind of at the end of our rope. I was collaborating with another graduate student, and I said, listen, when I don't know where I am and I need to figure stuff out, I just slowly start walking out away from the point that I know, mm-hmm. and I start investigating my surroundings, and I eventually figure out where I need to go. Okay, bromine can't see anything either. He's just responding to electronic forces. Let's do a scan where we just take the carbon-bromine bond and we lengthen it way out. Lengthen, see where the bromine drifts. And what we found is that the bromine drifted over to a copper atom. And we never would have thought of that. But it's like, you know what? Use a skill that I've used all the time as a survivor, for my survival as a blind guy, and apply it to chemistry. And we arrived at the result that, that got us into a good journal. So it's like, it's just funny how these things happen.
Actually, and one of the things that I find interesting is how many times you can anthropomorphize things in science, and it kind of works. People talk about,
it's crazy.
What would I do if I was a bromine sitting on this carbon atom?
Yeah.
And that logic actually led you to a solution. It shouldn't. The bromine doesn't think the way you do. It doesn't react the way you do. But still, there was something in there that helped you. And Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, talks about this idea of what would the gene kind of want to do to survive. And it doesn't have sentience to do that, but that insight helps him to understand the problem. It's amazing to me how often we can do things like that. If I were that gene or that bromine or whatever, what would I do? And it gives you insight.
Yeah.
There's no reason it should give you insight, but it does.
It sounds a little bit silly.
Yeah.
But it does.
It works. So awesome. Well, listen, so we talked about kind of your traditional path through your graduate degree program. Because a lot of our students, when we say unconventional, yes, you went through and did a lot of things that are different from your peers, but your peers were other students going through working in the lab, doing the same sorts of things that you were doing. Many of the students that I work with, they're alone, essentially. They're in the workforce already. And we say, quote, going back to school, but really they're still in the workforce and they're also in school working to get their PhD. And so that's kind of that unconventional path that we talk about. But right after school, there's a lot of unconventional things that you and I have talked a little bit about. And you mentioned in particular the intersection of art and science. So tell me about that a little bit, how someone who has a PhD in organic chemistry gets interested in art and science.
So this is an interesting thing, and it actually came about because I had the opportunity to teach, the great fortune to teach a few chemistry classes, general chemistry classes while in graduate school. And one of the things that I realized was that students that I worked with did not speak chemistry. So if I had supporting images, but then explained what these images showed, it wasn't good enough. They wanted really flashy, cool, nifty images that they could follow along with and utilize for their success, where they could see a picture of what's actually happening. And to me, that was fine, but they really needed those diagrams and they needed me to point and say this here and that there. Right. And it was really difficult to do. And I realized that I was spending so many hours with my assistants, building these, catchy images and remembering when to try to point and say this here or that there, and try to teach in a more sort of conventional way that sighted teachers teach sighted students. Right. And I kind of realized that maybe the assistance required in teaching chemistry was greater than I wanted to own and to take it in my career. The other part of being a research chemist and instructor of at the collegiate level is that you have to read a lot of literature articles, and organic chemistry literature articles. I'm still working on solving this accessibility problem, and I'm confident that we will. So I work with Dean and his group all the time to think through accessibility and to think through how blind and visually impaired students can more appropriately do chemistry successfully, study chemistry successfully. But really the question the difficulty is that papers were very hard to read, okay? Right. And because authors tend to, especially when they can use a picture, they tend to use just few enough words to make it very, very hard for me to follow what they're doing, right?
So the old saying is a paper is worth 1,000 words, and you would much rather have the 1,000 words.
I would much rather have the 1,000 words because it is doable to describe organic chemistry in words, but it is far less efficient than using a picture. I think that inefficiency is based on the highly visual system that we've created to explain chemistry and to explain science in general. We use pictures. It's just easier. And it's only easier because that's what we know. That's what we've done. It's conventional. So I decided while in graduate school, you mentioned at the beginning that I did do some work with Francis Ford Coppola, and indeed I did co-innovate with him truly blind, and I mean blindfolded wine tasting experience that we called Tasting in the Dark. And I'll spare you the details of that for this matter, but what I'll say is that led me to do a lot more work under blindfold with others in the food and drink space, other beer and spirits brands, also some oil and vinegar, a lot of work with coffee and even other food groups. What it also led me to do is to really think about using the blindfold as a technique to teach other people how to approach the world and how to be more sort of aware of the world around them. And that in a roundabout way led me to really understand that while I'm a scientist, I'm also really an artist and a creator. And I've arrived, wine is one of these interesting things, and I still am in the wine industry to this day, and plan to be for a very long time. Wine is an interesting thing to me that really spans that intersection between art and science so well, right? In one sense, the way that grapes grow, it's science, right? You need to water them. You need to know a lot of science to be a vineyard manager, et cetera, et cetera. But you also, the winemaking team and the vineyard management team needs to have a lot of art in their skill sets. And and really understand what, how to make a great wine and how to balance it. So I really believe that there's an intersection, a very fine intersection between science and art that I've figured out sort of how to straddle in my career.
Mhm.
And, simply put, I think, and I by the way, gave a TEDx talk all about this and all about something that we'll get to eventually called sensory literacy, which I'd love to share with listeners of the podcast. Which
Do you
we will
remember the
do.
name of that TEDx talk?
Yeah, it was called Sensory Literacy, and it was
Awesome.
by yours truly, Dr. Hoby Wedler. So, and it was on the TEDx Sonoma County stage. So, sensory
So
literacy.
I'm going to check that out. We're going to
you should-
definitely put that in the show notes. So for anybody who wants to just head over to our blog at dissertationdone.com and check out the show notes. If you happen to be listening on the podcast, we'll have that link down there for you, so that you can check that out. So
Thank you
go
for
ahead.
that,
Yeah,
Russell. I really appreciate that. But simply put, I think that science fills our toolbox with tools, whether that's a computer or a computer program or, a box of nails and a bunch of wood, and you go out and you build a house, that's fine. Science is what we use to build with, but art really dictates how we build it, and what we do. So I really do believe that we're all scientists in some way, and we're all artists in some way. And I think we all can own our particular part of that intersection between art and science.
No, that's certainly true, and you can see the kind of the ebb and flow between art and science historically. We have right now, years and years ago, architecture used to be, in my opinion, much more interesting than it is now. A lot of the architecture that was influenced by religion was very inspirational. And now when you drive down the street, even the churches look fairly plain. Some of the newer churches look like warehouses. It's very interesting that has happened. I'd like to see a little bit more art in some of those areas. But then we have art now infecting our science to some degree, because people are trying to decide what facts are and what is objective reality, and just put their own spin on it, their own take on it. And that's something where we have to understand that you can feel a certain way about certain things, but we have to agree on what objective reality is. So it's important to know that there is an intersection, that the two inform each other, but they also have their own domains, which is something I think we need to heed in this particular day and age.
For sure. No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more about what this intersection between art and science means to you. Maybe an example of something where you've used science to in an artistic way, or maybe where you've taken something that is art in a sense and imbued it with a bit of science.
Yeah, so I'll share a really interesting case study that I think is a good example of really understanding this intersection, where we were able to apply it in a real world example. So this whole project started with a large tech company based out of Cupertino, California. It's a global tech company. Reached out to their glass supplier, Japanese glass supplier, and said, "We need a glass that feels more silky. We're coming out with our new edition of phones and trackpads on our computers, and we need a glass that feels more silky." They have a really highly trained industrial design team, and that was the lead of the industrial design team that said that to the glass company. And the glass company scratched their head and said, "God, we make glass. We make glass for the automotive industry, we make glass for the tech industry, yada, yada. We haven't really thought about what silky glass means, though. Like, what are you looking for?" And they said, "Well, we don't really know what that means either."
We just know we don't like this. We need it to be better.
Yeah, we just need it to feel more silky.
Yeah.
And the glass company said, "Well, let's reach out to a creative company, a really out of the box creative company." And that company happened to be IDEO, IDEO, and they're based out of San Francisco. They're a global design company. You probably heard of them. And IDEO said, we don't really know how we can really get people to understand glass texture. The glass company can put all sorts of different coatings on glass, but how do we get this message across to the industrial design team of this tech company?
Mm-hmm.
And IDEO said, "Well, we do know this sensory expert. And that was me, who had just finished my PhD and was launching my company now, which is Senspoint.
Awesome.
And let's call him. So they called me. And what I did is I worked with a glass company on really understanding, first of all, what coatings they were applying to glass and how that might change the texture.
Right.
And what we arrived at are 4 glass surfaces with 4 very different textures. And we came up with a 2-dimensional texture, sort of glass texture protocol, which is where the textures are going from almost sticky to slick. So you can imagine if you rub your finger on a glass, it being kind of sticky, all the way down to it being really slick, where your finger just rubs right across it. Even if you push down hard, it just moves. Mm-hmm. Or another metric is going from smooth to rough. So you can have a rough glass surface that is also what I would call sticky, which provides some traction on your finger. Mm-hmm. So that was the science behind it. And then I said, well, how
were you saying
artistically?
that these were 2 dimensions and that you could also have a rough texture that is still
sticky?
Well, sticky makes sense.
Yeah, that is. Or you could have a rough texture that's got some granularity to it that's slick, that you might call smooth as well. So it's just like if you imagine an X and Y axis on a graph, on a piece of graph paper. The X-axis, let's say, goes from sticky to slick, and the Y-axis goes from rough to smooth to rough. So you can have something that's super slick and also super rough down in your lower right quadrant there.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that necessarily. I would have thought those 2 things would be fairly related. That the smoother you get, the slicker you get.
I kind of thought that too until we really got in the lab and started working on it. So that was the science behind it. And then the artistic part of it was, okay, how are we going to get a team of, out there industrial designers who are awesome artistic thinkers and industrial designers to understand this? So what we ended up doing is I ended up building with IDEO a tech day for this company where we brought all the industrial and all the graphic and product designers as well, about 500 people through in total, and had different stations where we paired glass texture with different foods. And at the end of the day, we paired glass texture with textures of wine on the palate. So at one station, we paired glass texture with both fresh and dried fruit. And at another station, we paired glass texture with cheese. And then, like I said, at the end of the day, we brought everybody together and paired glass texture with wine. And it was amazing because they got it. It was like, okay, we're taking something tangible. Like, I can describe how this cheese feels on my palate. Oh, yeah. And I'm feeling this glass. And I can use similar words to describe it. So it was sort of this aha moment, which ultimately, and it sounds like sort of a long roundabout thing, but it ultimately led to them making a decision about what glass they would use for their next release of phones and trackpads. And to a greater or lesser extent, they're still using this similar glass that we got them to arrive at. So I hope that example is sort of a decent, succinct case study to sort of define this intersection that we're talking about.
That's really cool. And from a business end, I bet you it doesn't hurt your clients' kind of attitudes and appreciation of the work you've done if you get them drunk at the end of the presentation.
You know what? That's my trick. I don't know if my work is good or not, but if I get them drunk, it all works out.
Yeah, if you pair it with enough wine, everybody's happy about how it turned out at the end of the day.
Right.
So
I say I'm a good cook because I like to make sure my dinner guests have had plenty to drink before they eat.
That's right. How is it that food is always so good?
That's right.
Well, tell me a little bit about moving on from that intersection of art and science. You mentioned your TED Talk was sensory literacy. What does that mean? And how should people become more sensory literate in your point, perspective?
That's a really great question. And simply put, I think sensory literacy, which I'll explain momentarily, really leads to awareness. And I think that what we all can strive to do is to be more aware of our surroundings, both internally and externally. So what we're thinking about, what we're processing in our minds, it's more like internal, and external is more everything from relationships that we see around us, all the way through to how we brand something and how we market something. And being aware, I think, is so helpful. And I'm actually doing some coaching and motivational speaking and coaching. I'm starting a coaching program myself around just coaching people to be more aware of their senses, and then ultimately lead to more general awareness, which I really think leads to a higher level of inclusivity of everybody. So
I'll tell you a little bit
sensory,
about an experience I had when I was in high school. We had this thing that we called a leadership retreat. So we went off for a weekend, and 3 days, maybe something like that. And purposely, we brought kind of leaders from the school, and then some of those kids that maybe could use a little bit of help, and got this group together. And there were several different exercises and experiences we went through. But one day we had this experience where we each had to pull a slip of paper out of the hat. And the slip of paper said, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. There were three things you could pull out of the hat. One says that you can't bend your arms. And so we actually splinted arms so you couldn't bend your arms. The other said you couldn't talk. And the other was that you were blindfolded, that you couldn't see. And we created these little triads where we had to get from where we were, and this was in like a summer camp kind of environment. So we went from where we were out the cabin, down the path or whatever, across some uneven ground to the cafeteria, where we picked out what foods we wanted and came back to the table and sat down and ate them. Now, if your arms don't bend, there are issues there. If you can't speak, but you can see, again, there are some issues there. And then if you can't see, but you can feel and move things.
Do everything else.
Yeah. So it was really interesting to take people. It was an icebreaker of sorts, but obviously much more involved than that. But to get people to appreciate what it's like to take all of these things that we take for granted and just not do one of them for a while, and then see how you can how you can succeed even with that sort of limitation placed on you temporarily. The appreciation we had for each other and also for these senses was really heightened by that experience.
Oh, that's interesting. And I love things like that because they just get you thinking differently. And that's ultimately what I like doing with sensory literacy in general, is just getting people thinking outside the box. And that's why these blindfolded experiences, whether they're tastings or otherwise, have been so impactful, I think, is because they get people thinking a bit differently about their surroundings and about the lives that we live. So to me, sensory literacy is very simple. It's the fact that we should be able to take in information from all five senses, process that information, and make logical deductions from that information, and create valuable content for our minds to consider, right? So I don't know. And I feel like if we're really aware of all of our senses, not just being able to look at something and say, yeah, that's a red fence, but being able to hear something and actually intelligently say what it is you think you're hearing, or smell something on the air and say what you're smelling, or any of these things. I think it just creates a richer experience. And I really do believe that everybody, blind, sighted, otherwise, whatever, can learn to be a little bit more literate in their senses. And it's something I've practiced in my non-visual senses for my whole life. So I feel like I'm probably more literate than most in my non-visual senses, which allows me to overcome not having eyesight. And I say eyesight very deliberately there, and not vision, because I do think that all of us have vision. It's just that some of us lack eyesight. Right. And ultimately, I just feel like if you're a good listener, if you listen and you don't hear, you're more aware. You listen and you process. And it can be anything from the birds outside as you're walking into work in the morning, to listening to your partner, business partner, romantic partner, whatever, and not just hearing what they're saying, but actually listening and processing just creates this level of awareness that I think fosters even more inclusivity. And the whole design behind what I put together with Senspoint, and what I'm bringing sort of more to my personal brand, which is more of what I'm doing just personally right now, is bringing that sense of awareness to both product design and experience design. And really my branding companies, my two branding companies, Senspoint is going to remain a branding company, but the food and beverage company is actually under a rebrand, and I'll get to that in a second, to a different name. Both of those companies perform what I call multisensory branding, which is that we don't just create a good-looking label. or a good looking brochure. We think about what paper your label's on. We think about how the product sounds when you open it. You think about if it's an edible or something you would ingest, how it smells and tastes. We want all these things to connect with each other. And to me, branding is multisensory because we're all sort of subconsciously sensory literate. It's just not necessarily at the top of mind. And if we can create wonderful, unique, cohesive experiences across all experience points of a brand, we're really creating something powerful and useful there. So that is, I think we're all visually literate. So if I said to you, Russell, you are a sighted man, if I said, what is this? And I held up a picture of a red fence. Well, I think you've seen enough dividers between, areas of land that are so-called fences, that vocabulary word is fairly clear. That one's fairly clear to me as well. But you also, the color red, since childhood, I would argue is just ingrained in you. You see it and you immediately come to that definition of, yep, this is red. I know what this is, right? So that's something that comes into your mind and you know it and you settle on it and that, boom, you're done. That makes sense.
Right.
And I think aromas can be the same thing. In my mind, they are. They're just vocabulary words that we know. And training ourselves in that vocabulary of sound and aromatics and tastes and our sense of touch, and really touch meaning both emotional feeling and actual feeling, I think is a really important exercise, and it takes a lot of practice. It's not just something you can do overnight. It's something you need to train yourself to do. But, we use our eyesight for 85 to 90% of the information we take in from our surroundings. Right. That's really striking to me because that's 85 to 90%. So that means that we have 4 additional perfectly good senses that we're only using to take in, 10 to 15% of the information from our surroundings. So it's really interesting there.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting. And I wonder, so I read an article, and it's been a long time, I cannot tell you where it came from, but that talked about the idea, a definition or a theoretical framework for intelligence is the extent to which you are aware of your surroundings. And they meant aware of your surroundings in, I think, that deep level that you're talking about. And so there's a question as to whether if you practice this idea of sensory literacy and you try to be more aware of your surroundings through aroma, you try to be more aware of your surroundings through sound, through tactile response. If you're trying to use all of those senses and you practice that, how does that change the way you process information from your environment generally? Because yes, you are going to pick up more information, so you'll have more information at your fingertips to analyze or compute with in the back of your brain. But how does that affect decisions that you make? Have you thought about this at all, or do you have any insights there?
I've thought a lot about this, and I think that what it creates is a more inclusive mindset, a more understanding of the opposition, if you will, when making decisions on what to do, on how to do it. So it's really interesting you asked that, because I have thought a lot about this level of inclusivity and how we can create that and foster an inclusive culture through the sense of being literate in all 5 senses and really mainly in the sense of being able to listen to what's being said. And, also just in a sense of being generally aware. And one area that I think that creates inclusivity, if you will, just hear me out here, humor me here. Let's consider, so we're talking in the end of the third quarter in 2020. We're doing this interview on the 29th of September in 2020. And anyone who remembers 2020 or is still living it knows that it's been a year of a lot of racial violence and also the pandemic that we're having. But I might say about some of the issues that we've been seeing with law enforcement officers using lethal force on certain minority groups. I think a lot of that could be solved by awareness on both a heightened sense of awareness and literacy in our senses on both sides. So if we look at it from the law enforcement side, I think we need to be more careful about, we need to be careful with what we do and not to necessarily take action right away, and really to think before we take action. But then again, those law enforcement officers have been trained that when they feel their life is being threatened, they need to do something about it. And, of course, there are going to be some bad, some mistakes made, and some people who truly shouldn't be in the profession. But what I'm getting at here is that, on the other side, I would be telling the minorities who are saying, hey, wait a minute, why are people getting shot? Is like, chances are the person doing the shooting said, stop, put that down, and they'll stop doing what you're doing. And if someone with a large gun is telling me to stop, I'm going to hear what they're saying, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to stop. So there's an element of...
Yeah, there are elements on both sides. I think when you mention training, I think that's super important on both sides.
Exactly, and that's one goal that I have is to train, for instance, law enforcement agencies about how to be more aware, even when dealing with people with disabilities, but also to treat the groups that are feeling jeopardized, how to be more aware of law enforcement, and that's just an example, I think, of how this sense of awareness can lead to general decision-making and general intelligence.
Right. No, I think that's true. And
I didn't mean to make anything political. I'm really trying to be apolitical about things here. I just use that as an analogy.
Yeah, I think here that there's no reason for people. This is a message I certainly would like to get out into the world, is that there are real issues in this world, and they don't have to always be tribalized. They don't have to always be us versus them. The idea of understanding and coming up with some middle ground, I think, is important. So I think certainly I've read plenty of stories of officers who have responded to cases where they were trying to do a well check or a safety call on someone that has some sort of disability, perhaps a mental issue, and the officer ended up responding with deadly force. Right. Let's figure out a way to train that differently. Maybe police officers aren't the right group of people to handle that situation. Maybe they just need to be trained to handle that situation differently. But if someone's being called in to protect the safety of someone who is not in complete control of their faculties, let's try to make sure that doesn't ever result in deadly force, unless it's just plain clear that the officer is in imminent physical danger. But on the flip side, there are certainly plenty of cases that admittedly don't get written up in the news media of those visits going well, and so we have to understand what's the difference between those visits going well and those visits going tragically, and how can both sides, so to speak, contribute to successful outcomes.
Yeah, and to acknowledge too that we are all only human.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we got to cut each other some slack on all sides.
If we could say one thing for 2020 and for the last several years, honestly, it's listen, none of us were brought into this world with an instruction manual. None of us knows honestly what the hell we're doing. We're all just trying. Yeah. Some of us have more advantages than others coming into this world, the way the world is laid out, our family, our whatever histories that we come into this world. That's just almost unavoidable. But
and it's tragic when the mistakes that we make end in someone's loss of life. And to be truthful, some of these things seemed very deliberate, and we're not mistakes made, but
correct.
The vast majority of them are mistakes. And I hate to say it, but we're all going to make mistakes.
Right. And mistakes can happen.
And hopefully we're all going to learn from those mistakes.
Mistakes can happen at all levels. And sometimes those are a matter of life and death, and sometimes they aren't. So yes, if you're lucky enough to be in a career where your mistakes generally are a matter of life and death, cut some of these other folks some slack when they're dealing with high stress situations where their mistakes can be a matter of life and death. But if this is something I was talking to my son about the other day. He said, well, we all need to be treated as citizens. And I said, yeah, but if you're taking on responsibilities where you do have, kind of life and death issues, matters of confidentiality or privilege that you're dealing with, like a law enforcement officer, like a physician, like a lawyer, like a therapist, then you're not just going to be treated like a citizen, but as somebody who has an additional level of responsibility. And we should treat all of those things seriously. And that goes for you and I in some sense as well, as we're sitting here talking about all sorts of things with the first name doctor. We need to know that people are considering our words differently than they might consider someone else's.
With those two letters, in front of our names, we take on a certain responsibility.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I tell my students the dissertation done all the time. Listen, when you graduate, people that knew you before, they're going to treat you just the same. Everybody else is going to look at you like you walk on water, just about. So you've got to treat that with a certain amount of respect and reverence. The amount of authority that you're going to command.
It's an interesting perspective. I haven't thought about that, but it's interesting.
Well, did your family all of a sudden start calling you Dr. Wedler when you graduated?
No, and I'm very particular about that. I like to go by my first name. Yeah. I just do. That's who I am.
Yeah, no, well, I agree, but outside of professional, I agree 100%. But it's important, you worked hard to earn that credential, so it's important that you
sure.
put it out there, when you're dealing with things professionally. But
that's true.
Let me, as we start to transition towards the end of our conversation here, you have done so many interesting and unconventional things. I'm wondering what else is on the list for you. Is there sort of a bucket list item, or not even a bucket list item, but just something that you feel is on your path, your evolution, your growth, that you want to see happen in the next, whether it's year or 5 years or 10 years, whatever it might be. What sort of thing is still out there for you that you'd like to see happen?
In the next several years, my goal is I really want to bring ease and more ability to people's lives. And I do have a passion for drink. A lot of my work has been done in that industry. And I also have a huge passion for teaching. So yeah. I am in the midst right now of starting a brand of basically ingredients that enhance flavor in your kitchen that you can use to cook foods with, to add more flavor and to add more excitement. So whether they be rubs or spices or sauces or salad dressings, things that add flavor. So not selling, done foods like all ready for you, but like, right. How can you in your home add more flavor and make food and bev even more exciting? So that's what I'm in the midst of doing now. I really do in the next 5 to 10 years have a dream of starting my own wine label. I'm just a total entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur, let me tell anyone who's thinking about giving it a go, is a lot of work, and you have to just be so patient as an entrepreneur. And I think my life growing up as a blind person in a sighted world has really taught me a lot of that patience. Right. Sometimes even then it's hard to keep my cool, but it's about starting things and rolling with them and getting people excited about them, and marketing them well. So I just want to teach people how they can make things in their kitchen right now taste even better and pop even more. And then in the future, you will hopefully within the next 10 years see a wine brand out there that I curated. I really have a goal of doing that and really being in the thick of straddling that intersection between art and science. All the while, keeping going with the branding companies and really maintaining that. And also, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, Accessible Science, which is the nonprofit that I co-founded back in 2012, designed to teach chemistry to blind or visually impaired high school and early college students. Now, the point there is not to create a bunch of chemists who are blind. The point there is to use chemistry and science in general as a lens to show these students that no matter how visual science seems, they don't have to let that visual nature of it hold them back from pursuing their dreams with the utmost confidence and happiness. So giving back is a huge part of my life. I serve on the boards of two nonprofits right now, both the Earl Baum Center of the Blind, which is a training center, and the Petaluma Educational Foundation, which is a very local educational foundation funding grants and scholarships to students where I live. The whole goal, I want to give back. I want to allow people to be their best selves. And this is sort of part of the coaching program that I'm starting. I really want people to just be able to understand the good in themselves and see the good in themselves and take that and run with it, and that's what the world's all about, is showing people that, hey, we are all good people, and just be aware of your surroundings, be aware of yourself, and really see that good in yourself, and use that to unlock so much potential. So I'm always going to be someone who wants to give back and does give back throughout all of my career. And I want to create, business opportunities that allow me to give back even more than I am now.
I feel like we're kindred spirits there. The main reason, I mean, I could work with people in a variety of ways, doing a variety of different things. The reason why I chose dissertation done is because I've seen so many doctoral students that had this coin flip that they face. It's a 50-50 prospect of being able to graduate when you go into a doctoral degree program, and being able to get them over the hump and get them out there into the world so that they can share their gifts and shine their light and make the world a better place is the satisfaction I get out of the work that I do there. I think that notion of getting people out there so that they can use their gifts and abilities and their kind of mission in life to make this world a better place. And it might sound hokey or corny, but I think that's, when you boil it down, I think that you should have something where you can say in your life, this is what I did, and this is what I was good at, and I did it because I enjoyed it. But ultimately, what's the legacy there? How does it make the world a better place? And that legacy could be geographically small, it could be geographically dispersed, it could be short periods of time, or it could be very long windows of time. But you should always be thinking about whatever you're doing for your career, how is it making the world a better place? And it's true for everybody. I really truly believe
any career.
Yeah, the guy that sweeps the floors, or the person that takes the trash out from the curb, they really are making the world a better place. And if you think they aren't, just try to get along without them.
Think again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you get your mail delivered every day, and we take that for granted. This person who is dedicating their life to making sure that we have materials that people want to give us.
That's right.
It's so significant how much of how every profession, everything we do is about giving back and making this world a better place. And I really think that, to me, legacy is what is said about you when you leave a table at a cocktail party. What you can decide, what is your legacy?
Very cool.
You will create an impression, and I think that impression is your legacy.
And I like that. It's not about, I think that gives it a little bit more immediacy, that it's not about what do people say about you when you die, but what do people say about you when you leave the room? Like right now,
Exactly.
You leave this room, what are people going to say about you? That's a really cool way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I love thank you. And I love what you're saying about what you do with Dissertation Done. It's really a way to give back. It's really a way to help students succeed. And, you said it at the beginning of the podcast, you fast track students in a really big and positive way. So I think that's awesome. We both have our ways of giving back, and let's just keep doing that.
Yeah. But for me, again, it's not just that level. It's what those students, what I know they're going to do, because I've heard from them so many times about what they are doing after they graduated. And that's what I think is the real reward, is that second step legacy. Yeah, I help them reduce stress and get things done quicker, but they're going out in the world and making it a better place. That's what I really think is cool.
Well, and you're that mentor. This is another thing that I love doing, is mentoring, and you're doing that. Like, you're going to have students that you hear from 10 years after they graduate. They're going to write to you and say, Dr. Strickland, what you did for me is amazing. It got me to the next level. And how good does that make you feel? How positive? I got an email from one of my sort of inaugural chemistry camp students from Accessible Science, totally blind guy, or very, very low vision. He's got just a little bit of vision. Doesn't really read print. And he just said, hey, I just got my PhD in physics and I'm going on to get my postdoc. And it's really because of your camp that I've realized I could do this. And I say, you know what? That's why we do this work. I mean, that's not why, but it's the cherry on top, if you will, of the work that we're doing.
Well, it is in a very real sense why you do it, is because, you go out there and you work.
Yes, it is.
You work hard for a lot of people, and you make various degrees of impact on all the people that you interact with, but occasionally you hit a home run. And what does that do for our society?
That's true.
I mean, who knows that this kid's not going to go out there and figure out how are we going to link gravity to all the other forces, which, if you're not a physics geek, that might not sound like much, but that's the big thing we're dealing with.
No,
right
I love it.
So who knows? But I know you'd rather go by Hoby. I'm going to still say Dr. Wedler. If someone wants to reach out to you and get in touch with you later on after this podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Go ahead and visit me at hobywedler.com. Currently, that site leads you to the Senspoint site, which is my company with a couple of other co-founders, a couple other partners. But I'm building up hobywedler.com, which has all my doctoral work, as well as some of these insights that we're talking about here today. There's a contact page there. You can easily get a hold of me there, or you can email me at Hoby, Hoby, at hobywedler.com, HOBYWED like David, LER.com.
All right,
I'm very reachable. I want to make super clear that I am very reachable. I want anyone and everyone to reach out. I'm always up for a great conversation, and I just love getting to know new people. And by all means, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. If you do that, just let me know that you found me through this podcast, and I'm excited to meet all of you.
So I want to hear back from you when we start getting these different rubs and spices and things that you talked about, because
absolutely,
I like to cook. I'm not a chef. I'm not trained, and I'm also when I cook, there's science to it. You got to cook things kind of the right way in order for them to get done. But I like to, if I'm going to cook something, I'll go onto YouTube and I'll watch a few videos where they talk about how to get it done, and then I say, okay, that's the basics. They'll teach you how to do it all the way, but I just want the basics. Then I'm going to go and riff off of that and do what I want to do and add things I want to add to it. So I can't wait to see some of this stuff, because that might add a few brushes to my palette, so to speak. I'm
oh man, no, I'm excited about that. I'm excited for you to try this stuff. It's my passion. It's a lot of fun. I put a lot of R&D into it. So I'm excited to continue chatting with you. And for all the listeners, this is basically an e-commerce, food company, and all the information there, all the useful information there will be up on hobywedler.com.
So we will get that to you guys. It may be there by the time you watch this podcast or listen to this podcast.
It may be. It may be. Let's hope so.
So I want to thank Dr. Wedler for being here. I want to also just remind everybody that this episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done, and you can reach out to us. There's really two ways that we would like to be able to help you, and one is if you're a doctoral student. You're beginning to work on your dissertation, you're struggling through the middle of it, or even if you think you're almost done, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done, and we'll see what we can do to help you get there that much quicker and with a little less frustration. And again, if you're out there living your unconventional life right now and you really want to expand that authority so that you can help more people, your dissertation doesn't get read by anybody after you graduate. For the most part, there are a few exceptions, but when you write your book and you get it out there in the popular press, that's what most people actually connect with. And it's a great way to expand your authority so that you can help people through coaching or speaking or whatever it might be. So if you've got a message in you that you'd like to get out to the world, we can help you with that as well. Go to dissertationdone.com/book and we'll help you out there. So Hoby, Dr. Wedler, thank you so much for joining me. We've talked on just so many different things, and I know that people are going to find this a fascinating episode. They're going to reach out to you at hobywedler.com to get more information and to keep abreast of all these new and exciting things you're doing. And please let me know when the food stuff's out, when the wine label's out. I want to hear about these things. I'm excited for you.
I'm going to keep you and your guests posted, and Dr. Strickland, the honor's all mine, and let's keep in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hoby. And for everybody else, go out there and live your unconventional life.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.